an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering One Piece, episodes 496 and 497, To the Sea Someday, The Pledge of the Three Brats, and Leaving the Dadan family for good, the kids' hideout has been built. In these episodes, we are still with Luffy and Ace and Sabo. I didn't think we would hang out with them for this long, but it looks like we've got a few more episodes to go even. And I'm actually really enjoying this little blast from the past, this flash to the past. I like it. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Florian for commissioning this episode. I am really enjoying how much info we're getting filled in on, guys, because y'all know that, like, from the episode where we find out the basics on where Zoro comes from, and I say basics because we still don't know who Zoro's family is, right? So we saw how he was trained, but he basically seemed to, like, spring from the woods fully formed. I really have been asking, where does Luffy come from? Who is his family? How did he get here? And I was surprised at the fact that we weren't given any of that. Like, the only things that we ever saw were him hanging out in the bar with Shanks and how that all went down. But he was already like 7 or 8 years old in those flashbacks. And even in those, there's no real guardian to be seen. We don't actually get any information on how he's being raised or who's doing the raising or anything like that. So I was sort of like, the way that I'm used to stories like this being told, it tends to be, first we're going to have this, like, kind of hero's journey of, like, the parents dying and the kid having to figure things out for themselves and struggling through life and eventually being taken in by somebody who's like a second family to them if they're lucky, or what tends to be the case even more, excuse me, I have the hiccups, I don't know why, is they were sent to a family that should have been their second family, and those people are awful to them, so this kid has to, like, learn how to survive despite these people who pretty much actively abuse them, right? But it was so surprising to me that, like, we don't get anything about where Luffy's from and what the deal is with his family and how he wound up here. And, like, guys, we're almost at episode 500, and I'm just getting a lot of this information now, and it's still, like, it's not even like we know who his mother was. I don't think she specifically has really been mentioned. I know that Ace's mother carried him for 2 years or whatever it was, and then died. So, like, you know, her heroism in not giving birth, it's so, like, Greek mythish. I do really enjoy that. It's like a very goofy idea in some ways, but it's so over the top that I think it actually works. But I'm still waiting to find out who Luffy's mother was. And it's a shame because it feels like at this point, who she is not really going to matter that much. And I feel a little bit sad about that because, like, if she plays such a small role in his life that we don't really have, like, any time with her here and no mention of her from him, I have to assume that she also died when he was young. And this is kind of like the only thing that holds me up, and it's a continual issue with this series specifically, but it's not like I'm saying it's the only one that commits this sin. But I don't love the fact that the women are so disposable and the men are always the ones who are notable badasses. It really does frustrate me how male-centric this series continues to be. And I am holding out hope that this gets improved upon with time because, you know, we have the Mr. 2 character who played for a joke and then becoming somebody who is like a full-fledged friend and badass and sacrifices himself for the sake of everybody. So it's not like this series is incapable of forward movement in terms of the way that it handles portraying people who are not just males and cis males at that. But I am not seeing a lot of evidence so far that that is changing like at all. We still have so many like pirate groups where either it's all men led by a woman and there's one woman, she's the captain, and that's it. You don't really see women being the pirates in the crew. The only time that there's a woman is if she's in charge, but she can't just like be a part of things. And you have a choice between either women who are attractive in that they look exactly like Nami, Robin, Boa, whatever, or they are actively drawn as like masculine and like repulsive in some way. There's just no in between. You are either completely like fuckable hottie or revolting. You are square and have a wide jaw and you're probably older and you don't have like a impossible hip to waist ratio. So that's already been a problem with the way that like women just are kind of a non-factor except in Luffy's crew. And even in the crew, we've just got the two, you know, but also the fact that Luffy and Ace's mothers don't really have any like present influence or notoriety. They are just the women who carried the children of the powerful men that are notorious. And I just want that to not be true. I am hoping that I get thrown a curveball with Luffy and it turns out to be like a different thing than what I'm expecting, or that the way it went down sort of like once it's revealed, I will feel like that sort of makes up for it in some way. But the way that I'm like sitting right now, I'm just feeling kind of like, oh boy, can't we just do something different? So I just wanted to get that out of the way, just off the top. The Pledge of the Three Brats. I really enjoy, once again, this opening song. I just want to mention that. But I just love that it's the Three Brats, because that is the thing that they call kids so much in this series. They throw the word brat around a lot. And we get a ton of training montages here. It's really, really fun because what Luffy is doing is he's trying to develop the techniques with his gum ability. And I love the way this works because it's so easy to think that this was sort of an automatic thing that he was able to develop because it was like just the way that you punch, you would just do it the normal way. And then your arm would extend and it would be as simple as that, you know, that you would just do it because that's the way that your arm moves anyway. And to find out that actually it's like not automatic at all, that he doesn't have great control. He winds up, the first time we see him try to do like the gum pistol, he accidentally like aims wrong and it hits the ground and bounces up and he punches himself in the face, which so embarrassing. And it turns out that this is like all they're doing. They are just fighting one another, and it's 100 matches a day, apparently. And we have Ace like saying to himself, it's inside his head, that he's never going to lose a fight to anybody, even Sabo. Like, sorry about it, bud, but that goes for you too. And Sabo, for his part, is saying, I can't stop until I'm stronger than Ace, or till I'm the strongest in the world. The two of them, while Ace is definitely like the superior fighter between him and Sabo, the two of them are light years ahead of Luffy. Luffy has never won against either one of them. And he is trying so hard, and he really believes that, like, well, when I get older, I'll finally be able to, like, show you two what's up. And they have to be like, you know, when you're older, that we'll also be older, right? Like, do you get that? And it doesn't seem like he does. I don't think he gets that at all. So I'm sorry, guys. I'm just watching the two of them fighting here, and it is really, really funny to me the way that they are going at each other. Like it reminds me, I wish that I could post things in the chat here, even though there's nobody in the chat today, but there is a video of a couple of like jackrabbits fighting at the side of the road that gets reposted a lot. And they're basically just like, their front paws are just like bibbity bap, bibbity bap, bibbity bap at each other. And it's one of the funniest fights you've ever seen. Like, it's so, and I'm not trying to say that Sabo and Ace aren't fighting for real. What I'm trying to say is that the two of them are illustrated as if they're just kind of skibbity bopping on each other, and not, I believe that it's a real fight, but there's something about it that feels almost like a cat fight, for lack of a better term. But yeah, so they're really like taking this seriously though. And I have to admire that, because this kind of training and focus is not the sort of thing that you expect out of children. And it makes sense that these are kids that don't have a lot of other options, because they're just like, what else are they going to do other than chores? So fighting, of course, that's going to sound much more appealing. And if they have this competitive spirit, it'll be really motivating to always feel like you're on the verge of outdoing one of the others, to keep pushing yourself. You know, it's part of what keeps people competitive with like video games and whatnot. I love the part where Sabo's about to attack Luffy, and Luffy just makes this like kind of net out of his fingers. And when Sabo comes up to him, he's like, does he think I'm just going to run into it? And he runs forward, grabs Luffy's fingers and yanks them back. And then when he lets go, they bounce back into Luffy's face and send him flying in the way that's like, it's like when somebody's got a rubber band, if you grab it and sort of pull on it and it makes them flinch back. It made me think of that move. So it's just really adorable that Luffy seems to think they're just going to walk right into this. That is such a kid-like. This felt like Oda wrote this scene after having played with children and laughing to himself about the way they are, because it's so transparent and silly what he's doing. Like, you can see right through it. But I could see how a little kid would think they're being really, really clever. Do you know what I mean? Kids are just, they function still on like Looney Tunes logic. So they think they're being sly and doing something that nobody's going to see this coming. And it's like, everybody saw that coming. I'm so sorry, but we all knew what you were doing there. So Ace, for his part, is just like, you should just learn to fight like a normal person. And then you mix in the rubber stuff afterwards. You're trying to do the rubber stuff first, and you're not good at it, and you've got to let it go. And Luffy is determined to keep fighting. And I love when he's like, well, you know the rules. It's 100 matches per day. And he has to like make Luffy stop. The fact that Luffy has had his ass handed to him, the number of times he has in this training day and still wants to keep going. He's got a little bit of a masochistic streak in him for sure, you know? So they go and they are able to get a crocodile for dinner again. I love how Luffy, once again, can't wait and just throws himself in there. And as they come home, there is the whole thing with Dadan basically being like, well, fuck you guys. But they're like, well, we got dinner, though. And that keeps being a theme to the point where I was sort of wondering about it. Like, do these people know how to find food themselves? Like, if the kids don't bring home a kill for the day, do they eat? Or do they depend on these children? And I didn't think they did, and it doesn't seem like they fully do. But there was sort of a suggestion sometimes, like everybody is so hungry once they bring food home, like they haven't eaten until now, you know? So we have another like moment where we go over to Gray Terminal and we see all of the scavengers who are hanging out in the dump, waiting for a new load of stuff to come in, and they go through it all and pick out what's good and bring it into the town to sell as recycled goods. And we get to see Luffy. It's like clearly like Luffy's nose, and I was sort of like, wait, is it? Because this figure is way too tall. But it looked like his nose, and the guard stops them and is like, well, what is that? And he says, well, it's crocodile skin. Do you want it? And when he shows the guy, he says, ew, no, just go ahead with it, which I was surprised by because I would have thought this would be sort of valuable. And the fact that the guy immediately rejected it, I was like, I would have thought he'd want it. But once they get inside the grounds, it seems like that's when we start to find other people who understand the worth of this thing. So they're dragging it on like a sort of sled, and some guy comes up to them and is like, hey, do you need help with that? And they don't respond. And then Ace, it's his voice who had spoken. So I was like, oh, okay. So it wasn't Luffy, but he says, buzz off. And then he knocks this guy down and says, you got to pick your targets more carefully or you might get more than you bargained for. And he yanks off this cape. This is 3 kids in a trench coat, basically. And when they reveal themselves, these grown men just say, oh, damn it, not them. Look out. Which, if you are a child, a literal child, and upon revealing yourself to your enemies, their response is, shit. I've got to say, that's pretty badass. It is. Like, who out there is a threat to grown men? I mean, that's just impressive. It just is. I can't help but be amazed at the way they come sailing out, and it's just like a cut. You hear everybody like groaning, and then we resume our transport into town, and everybody who has been about to try them has just apparently been like taken care of and leveled. I mean, really? That easily? These guys, they're training against each other. I had expected if they couldn't take each other down, that they were just not quite up for it against adults. But what I think is happening is that they're meant to be so good at fighting that they are challenges to each other, but regular people are not challenging to them. Wild. I mean, these adults should be embarrassed. So then we have, I've grown to really love the musical cues in this show, because anytime that something's supposed to be fancy, we get that da-da-da-da-dum, da-da-da-da-dum, dum, that like string music that's sort of a waltz, and that signals that we're dealing with like rich people, or at least people who like think really highly of themselves. And it turns out that this is Hightown, where those with noble blood are separated from their lesser neighbors. So it's supposed to be the most beautiful country in all of the East Blue. Not a hint of trash can be found in its streets. Okay, guys, look, I have to take a moment here because this is just relevant to something that I did yesterday. So I wanted to get a little patio table, and I try as often as I can to not buy things new. I try to go on Facebook Market and find it used because it's just cheaper and easier. And I found this table that was perfect, and this person gave me their address to pick it up. And it turned out that they lived in a gated community. Now, I just want to preface this with the fact that, like, my idea of what a gated community was that it's just basically like a nicer suburb that has a pretty simple gate with like a code and some cameras. So it's got slightly better security, but it's not really like that. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, I never thought of it as being a whole different world inside. And I wasn't understanding the level to which some of these, I'm not assuming all gated communities are like the one I visited, but this was just not on a level I grasped. So I apologize if you've heard this story before, because I'm probably going to tell it on another episode, like with Rashawn or something, because I haven't told her the story yet. But, first things first is this person gave me their address, and Google sent me to the gate, but it turns out that like the gate that Google sent me to wasn't the gate for guests. They only have one gate to get into the community for guests, but they've got 4 gates total for residents. So it basically was like, go round the side if you're the help, was the vibe, even though I know guests doesn't mean help necessarily. But it kind of feels like that. And so I had to find my own way there because Google didn't know that there was another gate. It sent me to the closest one. And I pull up, guys, this is just, it was so beyond what I was expecting. Immaculate, like, landscaping all the way up these trees, and like in such a way that you can barely see the gates at all from the street. Right? You pull up and there's a gatehouse with 2 uniformed attendants, the only black people that I saw the whole time I was there, both of them black men. And they were so, like, they stood so carefully and clearly took their jobs very seriously. And they took my ID and like scanned it and took all my info before they opened the gates for me. I had to show them the message on Facebook Messenger to indicate that I was allowed in, what the address was that I was going to. And then they raised the arm, but there are 2 like gold and black gates that fold inward. And as you pass through, there's this fountain and these trees hanging down and like fucking tulips blooming. And it was like I was on the set of a movie. Everything was uniform. All the grass on everybody's lawns was the exact same height, which I assume they just include lawn care and stuff in whatever membership you pay, like, you know, housing, whatever it is. There was not a piece of trash or even a weed growing up between the cracks in the road or anything. There weren't even cracks in the road. Now that I stop and think about it, like the roads were just absolutely, it looked like a Hallmark movie town. And if you haven't seen a Hallmark movie town, what I mean is they are the towns in those movies are complete, like Norman Rockwell style, perfect, like versions if you were imagining, like, what does a general store look like? The platonic ideal of a general store is what will be in like a Hallmark movie. And it was like that with the houses, and every house, they weren't all identical. I was expecting it to be like row after row of identical. No, you've got like Adobe Southwestern houses. You've got Victorian style houses. You've got like mod style houses that look almost like Art Deco, but absolutely perfect sidewalks. Everything is manicured to within an inch of its life. All of the front porches and everything look like they came out of a magazine. They probably hired people to design them with these like gorgeous wreaths and furniture and multiple like gates and fences with pouring roses. And I mean, it was so frustrating because it was absolutely beautiful, stunning. I felt this wave of envy over it. But also, I know that everybody who lives here, these houses, the sign outside said, start at $2 million a piece. Start. This is a neighborhood full of very likely shitty people. And yet, I want to be part of it. I wanted to be in it. I wanted to live there. I really did. Like, I saw all of these people just out for their morning jog with their dog on actual sidewalks. I haven't seen a neighborhood with a sidewalk in a fucking minute. Sidewalks, they don't do that anymore unless you live in a richer suburb or if you are in the city. That's it. You don't get sidewalks. You walk in the street and hope that the cars see you if it's too dark. And just everything about it, it was so frustrating because I was like, we could all be living like this. We could all just pay our fair share of taxes and our cities could just look like this. Our towns could just look like this. But no, we have to save it for our area where the rich people are because we don't want to share. And we want to definitely have things better than the other people because we need something to assure everyone we're better than they are. And I was so conflicted the whole time driving around, switching between this odd jealousy and then like this acute rage. And they even had this gorgeous like green in like a sort of in the center of everything. It was sort of like a town square where there was a big outdoor amphitheater where they clearly like put concerts and plays on. There was a racquetball and swim club as well, which I don't know if you have to pay extra for that or if that's included, but it was all just within walking distance, a few blocks from these incredible homes. And then they even had a school. And while the school was technically outside the gates, I have read that this is for tax purposes. It was clearly that school was part of the neighborhood. Like, I was talking to Candace and she was like, I bet that's a charter school. And it felt very separate from everything. You couldn't see the school from the main road and it just had the look of a place that's got all the amenities. You know, it's probably the kind of place that comes with the equipment that you see on TV shows that you're like, these kids are in high school and they have, where is it that they are? Like, we didn't have that in my school. This school likely had it. And it just made me so angry to know how people can be like paying into this fund for all of them in this neighborhood to live like this. And yet they don't understand the appeal of socialism, which is just what that is, but like on a grander scale. But their assumption is that, yeah, but we deserve it. And if I put it into socialism, then people who don't deserve it are going to get access to the same good stuff that I have access to, and they don't deserve it. They just think that they know that. There's no reason to assume that people in this neighborhood deserve to be there. Like, there's just none. What do you mean by deserve even? Anyway, it really, really reminded me of that, this whole like sequence. And, it's a real line in the sand. And you guys, I don't feel self-conscious about the fact that I'm a poor most of the time. There have been times in my life where I've been hyper aware of it, but a lot of it was in high school and college. And I was around other kids that had money, but I wasn't immersed in a world where everybody had money and I was the only one who didn't. I was one of half the population that didn't. And then there were people who did. Driving around in my scratched car with the cracked windshield, I felt so conspicuous. And like, I had to get out of the car and go up and get something off somebody's porch and leave money under the mat. And I was like really self-conscious getting out of the car, worried somebody was going to say something about me taking things from the porch because I look sketchy, you know, like just the whole feeling of who you yourself are. It's bizarre how dependent it is on your surroundings. So anyway, this mention about like, this is the shining jewel of the Goa kingdom, said to be the most beautiful country in all of the East Blue. Not a hint of trash can be found on its streets. The same can, Windmill Village can make no such claim. Although it's technically a part of the Goa kingdom, the fact is often swept under the rug by its more wealthy inhabitants. And we go to downtown, and apparently, because Sabo says, see, I told you they'd love that crocodile skin. Our pirate savings are really piling up. And we see him saying like that I knew they'd love it, but the faces of everybody looking at them do not look welcoming. They look disgusted and sort of horrified, and people are getting out of their way. And I was like really wishing that we got to see the response to the alligator skin, because I'm guessing that's sort of like a designer thing, but we don't get to see that part. We just see them still sitting on each other's shoulders in this cape, making their way to a restaurant. And they go inside, and this dude answers he's like the host, and he says, "Forgive my bluntness, but we simply do not serve your kind." And Sabo holds out this, what looks almost like a compact with like a pearl chain attached to it. And it's got a flower on top. It's made of gold. And he says, "VIP room, please." And the guy says, "But that mark, it can't be. Please excuse my impertinence, sir. We'd be honored to have a noble such as yourself grace our establishment." And this guy just keeps bowing. They go inside, and Ace is like, "Where did you even get that?" And Sabo says, "Oh, yeah, it's weird. I found it lying on the street." And of course, I'm just like, oh, Sabo's a noble. Okay, that explains his clothes. Like, it's very, you know, I was saying to you guys, we didn't know anything about where he was from. So this is our info dump in this episode about that. So they get let inside, and they're going to have ramen, which evidently Sabo has never even heard of. And they eat so much of it. They ask for one bowl after another. And eventually it becomes clear as they have managed to pretend that there's only one of them just eating a lot. And the waitress just keeps getting sent out to like bring more. But eventually she opens the room after this like pause to breathe outside because she has been run ragged. And as she comes in, she sees that there are actually, first of all, I think it's Luffy that's got his like weird rubber arm. But she screams, and when they burst in, it's the three of them. So it's clear that this is not a grown adult. And also that they don't have any fucking money. So they just jump out the window. I love, as they're jumping out, Sabo is just on his way down going, "Wow, ramen sure is good." You are correct, sir. I never had like proper ramen, you know, not the 25-cent per pack ramen, but proper like restaurant ramen, until like 2 years ago. And I got so hooked. I needed to like give myself an intervention because I was spending way too much money. It's very involved to make yourself. So I have never made it myself, and I still want to, but every time I look into what I need, none of the restaurant or none of the grocery stores around here carry the stuff I would use, and it would take a whole special trip, and I've still never gotten around to it. But yeah, as they jump out, like, you know, people are yelling about how they're criminals, and the people down on the street are like, but they're just kids. What? There's a security guard who's like, how did they get through the gate? I've had enough of their antics. I don't care if they're kids. They belong in jail. The waitress is like, did they know they were on the 4th floor when they jumped out the window? That's a long fall. And the restaurant owner is like, well, great. Now we can replace the window. And they ate 26 bowls of ramen. So that sucks. And they have left a note that apparently says like something like, put it on our treasure tab. And this guy is just like, well, what the hell does that mean? But we know what they're saying is eventually we'll be rich enough to pay you back. I would love to see Luffy actually do this. Luffy actually like come around and be like, hey, 10 years ago when I was a child, we ate a bunch of ramen and then ran. Here's the money for that. Sorry about it. As they're running away, there's a man on the street who yells for Sabo. And we find out later that it's his father. But Sabo, when he sees him, just immediately is like, I don't know who that is, so fuck this guy. And later on, we get the story where Sabo is like, he's not a royal. He's high enough on the food chain to be somebody of enough importance that his marriage would be like, if not actually prearranged, then it would certainly be a marriage made for the alliance and not like, oh, you get married for love. And the whole like story, it starts off with him as a very young child and him telling them that his parents said, you know, just study so that you can be good at the family business and get married and have children, and we'll be so happy, and we're sure you'll be happy too. And he's like, oh, just study and find the right girl and everybody will be good, like happy for as long as I live. And, you know, just the way that a child understands, like, this is how I can make my parents proud. And that's pretty simple and straightforward. So I'll just go ahead and do that. And we see the two of them like looking down at him with this kind of curious expression on their faces, which later on we sort of begin to understand is greed. It's just a sort of looking at their child like he's a resource, you know, not like he is a person. And then we get a telling moment where his father is on the phone and he finds out that one of his ships sank. He explicitly says he doesn't give a shit that the crew died. He just wants to know about whether the supplies are safe because they were really expensive and someone will pay for this, yada, yada, yada. And as Sabo comes in, he's lamenting that he can't afford this and just in a bad mood. And Sabo comes in and is like, hey, I drew this for you, Dad. And he drew a picture of his father who crumples it up and then tears it in half and says, your father is having a trying day at work. If you have time for this, you have time to study. And he just throws it all on the ground. And poor Sabo is like, I really was thinking to myself, Oda, did this happen to you? Like, you know, as an artist, were you actively discouraged from this? Because I could definitely see that. He was able to make a living out of it, but it was like, there's a part of me that's sort of at what cost, knowing what Oda has gone through to be constant in production and the health risks of that and everything. Like, it's really not that different from the United States, where if you want to work in a creative field, you've got to be willing to kind of kill yourself. And it's brutal, you know, like, yeah. Anyway, so eventually, he runs into some kid on the street who's like, I'm from the royal family, and that means you have to do everything I say, so carry me back to to my house. And Sabo just begins to walk past him, and he says, I want a piggyback ride right now. How dare you? And he begins to like grapple with him, and Sabo knocks him off and just starts to walk away. And the boy pulls a knife and comes at Sabo and says, this ought to teach you. And we don't actually see what happens. It cuts after he comes at Sabo. And then we jump to like this kid's parents appearing. And they're, of course, like, because they're higher up socially, are threatening that they're going to like do something to Sabo. And his mother immediately, like, the fact that Sabo has been hurt does not matter. This kid went to assault him with a fucking knife, and she does not even want to hear it. She actually hits him in the face, and she turns to this woman and says, my son can be such a little beast. I blame myself. I do hope you weren't hurt. It's terrible. I know. Please forgive us. I assure you he will be severely punished. I'll do anything I can to make things right. Shall we go to the doctor to make sure your son isn't injured? And we come to the present, and Sabo says, then I realized that they love their money, their property, their status more than they love their son. Or no, he doesn't even say more than. He just says, but not their son. If I couldn't marry into a royal family, I was useless to them. They tried to teach me culture and literature, but I guess I didn't learn fast enough because they were always arguing and getting mad. That family had no place for someone like me. I know you guys have it worse, but even if I had parents, I was still alone. And we go like another flashback to his father being like, well, you've been sneaking around. Where have you been going? I shouldn't have to tell you this, but stay away from Grey Terminal if you know what's good for you. We nobles are privileged to live in Hightown with the king and his family. It's a life people down there can only dream of. By the same token, you do not belong in their world. And we have this like weird scene where all of these dudes who are in Grey Terminal, they're sitting around and they're like eating. And when Sabo comes in, they recognize him and are like, you again, what are you doing here? Your parents are going to string you up. And he says, tell me another story. I want to hear all about the countries that you've been to and your adventures on the high seas. And these dudes who like seem like they're ready to, you know, pound this kid into paste are basically like, yeah, all right. And so this is where he finds his escape, and he tells Luffy and Ace, I ran away from home. It's so funny the way that they react, because I'm like, yeah, he ran away from home is like self-explanatory, guys. Like, clearly that's why he's out here. What do you mean? But I guess they just had not put two and two together. And so Sabo is just determined, we're going to set sail and we're going to see the world. And once we've done, like, seen it all, I'm going to write a book about kids like me, or write a book about it all for kids like me, which I really liked that idea of, you know, for kids that don't get to be free and go and live the way they want to live. I'll give them a window into what it's like. So this is the first time that Luffy says that he's going to be king of the pirates. And they all start to realize, like, what are we going to do in terms of captaining this ship? Because we have all apparently assumed that we would be the captain and everybody else would be like our first mates or something. And we never even really like talked about that. And they don't come up with a solution here. But this is the scene where Ace goes and gets some sake and pours some for all of them and says, this is like all it takes to become brothers is to share some sake. So, they all drink it together, and I was just like waiting for a reaction of them sort of spitting it out, but evidently sake is not new to them. Apparently this is old hat and they are not impressed by it. I really kind of thought we were going to have a moment of like, ew, what is this? Oh my God, you know, but no, we do not. So the next episode is, as I'm running out of time, I'm like trying to figure out exactly how I'm going to break down this part of the story. But these boys have like dug a hole in front of the door of Dadan's. I was about to say Dadam's. They were allegedly going to catch some wild boars, but it was right outside the door, so she walks right into it, and then another dude like collapses into another hole while she's yelling at them all. We jump into town at this point, and Sabo is real cocky with this group of dudes around him being like, all right, let's skip the chit chat and get straight to ass kicking. And we see Ace swing in on one of Luffy's arms. Like it's very sort of, Tarzan-ish. Luffy lets go of Ace and his arm snaps back and kind of sends him flying. And then he lands in, he hits one dude like a cannonball as he lands and knocks him down, but he takes way too much time on his wind up with the other dude, and he gets punched in the face so that this dude's hand sinks in because his face is made of rubber. And so his features are so smushed that he can't see at all. And it is the creepiest looking thing. I don't feel like we've seen this happen to Luffy before, and I did not care for it. It's very butthole-esque. I do not like it. Not one bit. And the cops arrive just as they're fleeing and just find a bunch of dudes like on the ground having been beaten to death. Probably not to death, but you know. So this is when they come home and they bring a deer, and basically tell Dadan like, yeah, we're late. Get over it. Here's some food. We have the extended sequence of everybody like trying to get in on the food and the kids just eating most of it. Apparently, everybody fighting over it. Eventually, there comes a point where Dadan finally is able to, like, lay down and go to bed. And you guys, I found this so funny. She's asleep and she's dreaming. And in the subtitles, it says Hot Dadan. Because she's imagining herself in her dreams as being beautiful. I don't know how common a thing this is, but guys, I have this dream all the time. That I'm like back to the shape I was in as a teenager, or that I got like this immaculate hairstyle or cut or color and I look amazing now, or just like any number of changes that have been made that all of a sudden I'm just like super hot. And it really like hit a nerve for me. I sympathize greatly. And eventually this wonderful dream gets interrupted because the boys have decided to start training in the middle of the night, and they fall right on top of her. And she is like, I have about had it with these fucking kids. She's saying they've become hazardous to my health. And Dogger says, I think they've been running the show for a while now. And she's like, well, then I will remind them whose fucking family this is. Garp can suck it. He doesn't own me. And as she's saying that, she turns around and she thinks it's Garp behind her. But it is not. It is Makino, and I can't remember the guy's name, but it's the mayor and the bartender from the town that Luffy is originally from. And they have just come to visit because apparently 6 months have gone by, and they're just like checking up on him. But they say don't tell Garp. And I was like, that's interesting. Why aren't they allowed to see him? But the interaction here, like, I'm kind of, oh, this is great. I love the fact that, like, there are people who care about him. And Makino is like, I brought you some new clothes because I'm sure Garp didn't, like, leave you anything. And I also brought some stuff for your friends as well. But probably they'll have to be altered a little bit. And she smiles at Ace and Sabo. Ace doesn't want to, like, participate. He acts like he's too cool, but he can't help but be, like, a little interested, and he seems embarrassed by that. I love when she says, you seem like a good boy, and Ace says, who told you that? And Luffy's like, you're blushing. Oh, God, these two. It's very, very cute. I enjoy any time that Ace taking himself seriously kind of becomes the butt of the joke, because he does really need to, like, calm down with that a bit. Then Makino, like, makes all of this food, and everybody just has this wonderful night. And I love that you see the shadow of Garp coming up to the house, and he falls into one of the holes for the boars. And as Ace is saying he's going to become the best pirate, and Luffy is arguing, like, I'm going to be a pirate before either of you two, we see Garp standing in the doorway, and his eyes are shining like stars because he's so angry that they're still talking about becoming pirates. And he basically, like, beats the shit out of them. It's such an ongoing thing in this show that people who beat you love you. It's really fucked up. But he also beats Dadan and is like, well, obviously you're raising them wrong because they still want to be pirates. So of course you are going to get some of this as well. He calls Sabo Squirt, and Luffy's immediately like, he's not a squirt, he's Sabo. And we're going to become pirates whether you like it or not. And Garp is like, well, if you want to be treated like criminals, then I can beat the shit out of you like criminals. No problem. Meanwhile, Makino and the mayor have left, apparently got out of there just before Garp arrived. And they're just thinking, as they're leaving and hearing all the ruckus, like, oh, these kids better figure it out because they're in some trouble. And they're so, like, relaxed about it. I'm like, do you guys hear these kids being beaten the fuck up? And you're just like, well, you know, what a weird culture. So what the boys decide they're going to do is they're going to create their own hideaway and just going to, like, leave the Dadan household. And it's a really, like, Garp sort of makes them think it's their own idea, but I get the feeling that this is what he was hoping for them to do. So they go out into the woods, and in the morning, Dadan is sort of like, what the hell are we going to, like, they could get murdered out there. I don't want to be taking care of these kids, but I also don't want anything bad to happen to them. And he's like, well, I'm going to leave, and by the time I get back, you better have made them proper Marines. And Dadan is like, yeah, that's not going to fucking happen. What is that you said? Nothing, bye! Oh my God, I did think that was really funny. But Dadan eventually is like, let me go and find out where they are. And the boys have been working really hard on putting this hideout together. It's super, like, this is like the fantasy, right? When you were a little kid, did you, like, want a clubhouse? Did you have a treehouse? A treehouse was really the dream, right? I didn't even have, like, the kind of backyard that had a tree in it because I lived in a condo. So that was just absolutely not on the table for me. And tree houses are dangerous enough that a lot of parents are like, yeah, I don't think so. We're not doing that. However, if I were to ever have a kid, it would just be I would definitely do a treehouse. It's, for me, having like a place that was sort of away, that felt like my own, even if it was sort of under surveillance in some way, was such a huge, important part of growing up that I would just want my kid to have that. I might put a Ring camera in there somewhere just to keep an eye and make sure that they're all right. But probably after they reached a certain age, I would stop with that as well so that they could have their privacy. I'd probably do that up until they were like maybe like 10 or so, just to make sure that they're not playing with matches or about to fall out. But yeah, I really just, watching them put this together, kept thinking about, as a kid, how much I wanted to have a sort of like secret society meeting up place. Sort of like what I always thought of when I was little was like the Midnight Society from Are You Afraid of the Dark? And they would just get together in the middle of the night and tell ghost stories, and that was all they did. But the fact that they had like a place that they gathered and a sort of ritual to it, where right before you told the story, you would take some of that sand and throw it on the fire so that the flames would turn a different color. It all just felt really magical to me, and I was fascinated by it. So yeah, they've like managed to go through all of the stuff at the dump to get the equipment and supplies that they need. And we get the montage of them putting this all together. And then there's a really funny bit where Dadan she has finally found them and is trying to check up on them in the middle of the night while they're asleep with like good motivations. She's looking at them and she's like, aw, they're actually kind of adorable when they're asleep. And she's like, let me just put this blanket that blew off of Luffy, I'll put it back. And as she steps forward, it triggers a booby trap, which Sabo had said he was going to construct. But it causes the whole, like, this Rube Goldberg machine to go off that releases a giant, a mallet, I guess, to fall and just bash Dadan in the stomach, and it sends her flying in this like slow motion. It's really funny, honestly. I just love the fact that every time she starts to warm up to them, they're immediately like, fuck you, but not even on purpose necessarily. And she falls, and they're so high up that they can't even see her after she lands. So when they wake because of the noise, Sabo is like, that's weird. I thought like the thing went off, but I don't see anybody. I made it in a hurry, so I may have goofed it up somehow. I'll just check tomorrow. And they all basically just like go back to bed. Meanwhile, on the ground, Dawn is like, fine, go ahead and be pirates. I don't give a damn. In fact, I hope all three of you drown in the sea. And I couldn't tell if Ace sees her because he stands at the window for longer than anybody. I don't think he spotted her. But yeah, this is the transition from being part of her household to doing their own thing. And I, for one, am proud of them. All right, guys, I have to wrap this one up, but it was really fun. I'm looking forward to the next ones and seeing where we're going with this. So thank you guys again so much for listening. And until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.